From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are continuing to talk now about Friends star actor Matthew Perry, who passed away back in October. It's hard to believe it's been that long already, but charges were just brought recently against 5 people, all accused of providing ketamine to him. And the official ruling of his death, Greg, was acute ketamine poisoning, overdose.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I kind of thought from the outside in that basically they were just doing an autopsy in the ordinary course because Matthew Perry was Matthew Perry. He had as famous as he was for his comedic role on Friends, he was as famous for a lifelong battle of addiction. In his recent biography, he details in vivid detail his hospitalizations, his treatment, his struggles. And in spite of all that, these criminal charges indicate that 5 people conspired to give him ketamine, and that was the proximate cause of his death when he drowned in his hot tub.
Let's talk about charges against those 5 people. Some of them have already pleaded guilty. A couple of them have not entered a plea. And before we get to that, the latest news just out today is that the 2 doctors in the case have been allowed to reopen their clinics.
It's remarkable, and 5 people were charged, 2 doctors, a personal assistant, someone that was selling ketamine on the black market known as the Ketamine Queen.
Yeah.
And these individuals have been charged federally. The statutes they're charged under could carry mandatory minimums. The sentences are going to be in excess of that, of 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
But basically, we see here in East Tennessee, throughout the United States, the Department of Justice really casting a broad net, trying to get their arms around legally the opioid epidemic. More people die of opioid overdose than car wrecks in this country. Tennessee, the prescribing of opioids is greatly in excess of what the national average is here in Knox County in 2022.
It's getting a little better, though, right?
A little better, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
461 people lost their lives.
Goodness.
But the reason it's getting a little better is the implementation in 2011 of the CSMD, or it's also called the PPP, but the Controlled Monitoring Substance thing.
It's a long title, but basically it's to control how many prescriptions go out and have people get their hands on these.
What it does, if you're a pharmacist, if you're a doctor and somebody is doctor shopping, whatever, you access the CSMB, and you know exactly how many drugs have been prescribed to this person, whether they are abusing those narcotics. You know if a new patient comes in your office, if you're a doctor, whether this person is doctor shopping.
Yeah.
And that degree of accountability and record keeping has caused overprescribing to decrease dramatically. But in spite of the fact that the elevator is going down, it is still at epidemic proportions here in Tennessee and elsewhere.
Yeah, like so many people say, one overdose death is too many. We still have too
It
many.
is. And let's talk about this case. It's just kind of a microcosm of what the law requires. Typically, doctors, pharmacists are charged much like drug dealers under 2 statutes, 18 U.S. 841 and 846. And here's the test, Lori. Was the narcotics prescribed in the ordinary course of a professional practice for medically necessary reasons?
And it's come out that Matthew Perry was seeing a quote-unquote legit doctor who was prescribing ketamine under supervised use for depression. He was apparently getting it, obviously, outside of the scope of that doctor. And we have an interview, an announcement actually from U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada, talking about something that so many people found so disturbing, so hateful, from one of the doctors texting about Matthew Perry. Let's listen.
Over 2 months, from September to October 2023, they distributed approximately 20 vials of ketamine to Mr. Perry in exchange for $55,000 in cash. Defendant Placentia saw this as an opportunity to profit off of Mr. Perry. He wrote in a text message in September 2023, quote, "I wonder how much this moron will pay."
That's the quote from the doctor.
Martin Estrada just gave his opening and closing argument at that press conference. And imagine if you're defending these doctors, or the personal assistant's already entered a plea of guilty, Ketamine Queen. You know, and we've talked about it time and time again. You know, it's not the James Bond type surveillance. It's not the FBI tapping your phones. It's your own smartphone and what you do. And in this case, these doctors that are supposed to be prescribing drugs in the ordinary course of a professional practice for medically necessary purposes said, quote, "I wonder how much this moron will pay." You know, in spite of the fact that you're on notice that he has a horrible addiction problem, he has struggled, it has been created medical issue after issue, and you know, this case I think is going to be extremely simple in terms of proving what the intent of the doctors are. Now, in these cases, the thing that makes it somewhat difficult, when you also charge someone with the death of an individual based on the overprescribing, you have to prove to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that those particular drugs, now we got the Ketamine Queen, we've got 2 doctors, we've got an assistant that injected the ketamine, but you've got to prove which drugs on that occasion caused the post-mortem interval caused the death of Matthew Perry. So,
but they can get in trouble just for giving them to him.
Separate 2 parallel trains. One, it's against the law to prescribe medication in the manner it was prescribed, but typically it's another charge in the indictment when they prosecute you for the death. So, you know, you're going to see two kind of trials. But, you know, once again, and how many times have we said it, the most powerful evidence is going to be the doctor's own words on those text messages. So instead of bringing in an expert and saying it's not our fault that Matthew Perry got drugs from other sources, we were trying to prescribe in the ordinary course as any doctor would do. You were in it for greed.
For the money.
The pecuniary gain, period.
Yeah, just so overcharged to begin with. Just at the first of a long list of just heinous things that happened in this case. I'm looking down because we were trying to find out more information, late breaking news, that those 2 doctors are back at their clinics. Now, I don't know that they're able to prescribe. I think that's obviously off the table, but how are they able to just kind of resume?
And this is what happens in a case where you see, we see it in the news, when someone issues a search warrant, typically, you know, the feds come into practice, they get the medical records. They already have a lot of records typically, but then you'll see another parallel proceeding from, in Tennessee, it's called the Board of Health. But you'll see the licensing agency in that state start an investigation, start an action to revoke or suspend that license.
Okay.
Now, most, if I assume these doctors, if they were getting all of that money, paying $2,000 a vial for ketamine, selling it for $11,000 to Matthew Perry, they got good counsel, and I think if I was their lawyer, I would advise you to turn in your DEA number. So maybe they are practicing, but not practicing in a manner where they could prescribe scheduled drugs. So you could say, hey, you know, you broke your leg, you got this, take 4 Tylenol, call me in the morning, and their scripts are gone.
Still show up to work.
Yeah, still show up for work. But, you know, the other thing in a federal case, and we've talked about this, it takes a while to wind through the system. even though there's a Federal Speedy Trial Act, cases are supposed to be tried in 90 days. They typically get continued once, twice, 3 times, because in any significant criminal case, you've got experts. In this case, you're going to have medical examiners. You're going to have experts to talk about the standard of care, how they deviated, that this was not prescribed in a medically necessary manner. So it'll take a while. And in the
Will
interim,
everybody be tried separately? How do you think this is going to play out? Maybe the doctors would be tried together, Ketamine Queen by herself, his assistant by himself?
You could ask, but I don't know that there's anything under the rules that would entitle someone for a severance. Now, the only thing that typically the biggest way cases get severed if one co-defendant gives during the conspiracy a inculpating statement against other defendants. So, you know, if
makes a deal.
Well, but the statement's got to be made during the course of the conspiracy.
Okay.
So, you know, maybe some of those texts between the 2 doctors could give the Ketamine Queen a reason to ask for a severance under Bruton. That's the leading authority. But I think what you're going to see is the U.S. Attorney's Office want to keep them together. But, you know, if there is a case that should be on American greed, a case that is clearly a pecuniary gain, it is a Matthew Perry case, because literally if you listen or read his autobiography,
Yeah, I did.
it is heart-wrenching as he talks about time and time again how he nearly died from overdosing, from being overprescribed, for being in the emergency room, and people either wouldn't see him because he was Matthew Perry or treating him differently because he was Matthew Perry.
Yeah.
But a very, when you get the insight from his own perspective, very sad, and to think that because the, quote, moron had the money to pay, they manipulated his weakness, his addiction. And, you know, Lori, I think this is a case that should be prosecuted, not only for specific deterrence with these doctors, but also general deterrence. So other similarly situated people will be held accountable. But this is a new phenomenon that we're seeing, and it's the concierge doctor
Going after these.
Well, they don't have an office.
Yeah.
They don't have a nurse. They've got an answering service. They got a DEA number, and they got a pad of scripts. They can come to your house, meet you wherever. But a very unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to see the personal assistant that administered the drugs has already pled guilty, and all criminal cases, ABA recent standards show 92% plead. So I would assume that you will see others working out agreements as discoveries exchanged and this case moves forward.
We'll be watching. And you mentioned Matthew Perry's book. Did you read it?
I did.
I listened to it.
Well, I listened
in my
to it,
car,
so, yeah.
and hearing his voice, that just made him even more human to everybody. And when we learned that news, I think it was even more devastating to him. What a great guy.
And he sounds so vulnerable when he
Yeah.
talks about his addiction,
Yeah.
and very candidly talks about being a prisoner of his fame and his money. I know that sounds kind of trite.
Addiction is addiction is addiction.
Addiction is addiction, and you know what? These doctors preyed on somebody that has an illness,
Yeah.
an addiction problem, and was vulnerable. And you know what? The jury is going to look them in the eye as those text messages are read aloud. And if these people don't plead guilty, I think justice is going to be very swift.
All right. Like I said, we'll be watching, and we'll talk more about this coming up at 5:30.
Let's do.
Thanks for joining us.